Something is wrong. Lil Scrappy was supposed to be improving, but now, the doctors just delivered the devastating news. His latest test results are not good, worse than anyone had expected. Suddenly, things are different. In the hospital room, there is tension. Machines beep urgently, doctors whisper softly, and Scrappy's family? They're terrified. Momma Dee grips her phone, trying to hold back her tears. Bambi is looking at the doctor, standing still, her hands shaking, and she is waiting for answers. But the worst part? The doctors don't have any. No one knows why Scrappy's health is deteriorating so quickly. His heart rate is erratic, his breathing is weak, and the medical staff is unsure of what to do. His family's only option at this point is to pray. Will Scrappy be successful, or is something far more dire on the horizon? Watch as we break down everything, including the shocking details of his test results, the emotional reactions of his family, and the doctor's last-ditch attempts to save his life. The update that no one expected was this one. The atmosphere of the hospital was tense, and the intensive care unit was filled with a stifling mixture of antiseptic and anxiety. The constant beep of the monitors filled the room, a somber reminder that every second mattered. Lil Scrappy lay motionless in the hospital bed, his chest barely rising and falling under the weight of the machines, holding him steady. Once vibrant and full of life, the rapper was now a fragile individual caught in a life-or-death situation. His breathing was labored, his normally assured face was pale, and his condition was deteriorating every second. Bambi sat next to him, trembling as she held his hand. Her normally immaculately manicured nails had chipped due to the stress of the past few days. Her eyes were swollen from constant crying, and her voice was hoarse from whispering prayers that seemed to go unanswered. In an attempt to get him to move, she put her fingers to his cheek and muttered, "Scrappy, baby, please, you gotta fight." Momma Dee, the fierce matriarch who had always been a rock, stood near the door and watched with lustrous eyes, but all she could do was watch helplessly after spending her entire life defending her son and shielding him from the outside world. You assured me that you wouldn't abandon me. Lord, don't take my son," she muttered to herself, rocking slightly on her feet, seeming to be holding herself together with her arms crossed tightly, but her occasional sniffle betrayed her broken heart. Not in this way. The door creaked open and the lead physician, Dr. Mitchell, walked in, his normally calm and collected face now etched with concern and fatigue. And although he had delivered bad news before, this case made him feel different. With his hands clasped together, he took a deep breath and looked between Bambi and Momma Dee, understanding how much was at stake because he had seen the public's outpouring of love and the fans' passionate requests. "We need to talk," he said in a firmer but softer tone than usual, and Bambi's eyes begged as her head. "What is it? What's happening?" Taking a deep breath, Dr. Scrappy's most recent test results have returned. "And they don't look good," Mitchell said, raking his fingers through his graying hair. A dense silence fell over the room, and everyone felt as if a weight had been placed on them. Momma Dee inhaled sharply and her hands balled into fists. How terrible! The doctor hesitated for a moment before speaking. His kidneys are under a lot of stress, his liver function has significantly declined, his oxygen levels have dropped again, and we have been closely monitoring his heart, and there are signs that the strain is worsening. Bambi shook her head incredulously. "Nevertheless, you said yesterday that he was improving. How could that have happened so fast?" Dr. Mitchell's voice was empathetic. "That is the unpredictable nature of circumstances like his. Sometimes the body shows indications of recovery before unanticipated problems arise. It's a battle, and right now it's getting harder." With tears streaming down her cheeks, Bambi gripped Scrappy's hand tighter. "But what does this mean? What are your thoughts?" "The idea that you're idle." Dr. Mitchell's expression darkened. "We're doing everything we can. However, if his condition doesn't improve the following day, we may need to consider more drastic measures." "Like what?" Momma Dee's voice was sharp, her maternal instincts roaring to the surface. The doctor hesitated, then answered. "Dialysis in an emergency, a potential transplant if things get worse, and we may need to consider putting him on life support if his heart continues to fail." "No," Bambi cried out in a raw voice, filled with panic and grief. "Scrappy is a combative person, so this is not how he will pass away. That is not possible." With her protective instincts taking over, Momma Dee took charge and said, "My son has been through too much to just give up now," in a trembling but firm voice. "He'll be successful." "He has to." Dr. Mitchell nodded gravely. But I need you both to get ready, he said, turning back to the machines after taking one last look at Scrappy's vitals. We're doing everything in our power to make sure that happens. The next 24 hours will be critical. Already, the outside world was reacting to the hospital. Social media was ablaze with concern, and the news was in a frenzy. Fans rushed to Instagram and Twitter in a desperate search for updates. A worldwide trend was #PrayForScrappy. Celebrities, close friends, and fellow artists were posting heartfelt messages pleading with everyone to send prayers and positive energy. Even individuals who had previously disagreed with Scrappy were putting aside their disagreements to offer their assistance. The hospital room was oppressively tense. The silence between Bambi and Momma Dee was filled with unsaid fears. Bambi finally made a statement. "We need every prayer we can get," she said resolutely, "and we must call everyone." Momma Dee nodded and pulled out her phone. "We're doing more than just praying. We are fighting." The constant beeping of the machines around Scrappy was a reflection of how serious the situation was. As the night went on, one question remained. Would prayer be enough to save him this time? The tension in the hospital was unbearable. Every second seemed to go on forever because of Scrappy's fragile state. His fate was in jeopardy, and the only sound in the room was the beeping of the monitors. Bambi wiped away her tears and tried not to cry, but the stress of the situation was wearing her down. Despite her fierce exterior, Momma Dee was crying on the inside. Outside the hospital, the situation was just as dire. The news of Scrappy's deteriorating health had spread widely. Fans had gathered outside the hospital, praying, holding candles, and hoping for a miracle, desperate to hear any new information. Paparazzi with flashing cameras surrounded reporters eager to get any inside scoop. The media was going crazy, with every major outlet covering the story. The headlines screamed, "Little Scrappy's condition is getting worse, and the family is in despair." Doctors' worst fear, will Scrappy survive? Breaking, Lil Scrappy might need life support. "Hey, what the devil is happening?" said Scrappy's best friends Kirk Frost, Rashida, and Young Jock as they rushed to Bambi and Momma Dee through the open door, their faces white with anxiety. Young Jock demanded, her voice shaking with urgency. "I thought he was getting better." Bambi shook her head, unable to come up with anything to say. Momma Dee took a deep breath and explained, "The doctors said his organs are struggling, and his heart. His heart is under too much pressure." Rashida gasped and covered her mouth. "Oh my God, this isn't possible." Kirk Frost moved forward, putting his hand on Bambi's shoulder. "We have everything you need, Scrappy, and we are here for you." Bambi mumbled, "All I need is for him to wake up," as tears welled up in her eyes. "He needs to defend me." "We've conducted more tests," he said slowly as he reappeared, his face unreadable, and everyone froze, holding their breath. "The results," he said, pausing to examine Scrappy's unconscious body. "They don't promise anything." Bambi was really about to pass out. Kirk grabbed her and restrained her. "What does that mean?" "Croaking," she said. "Doctor." With a sigh, Mitchell's eyes were serious. His kidneys aren't working as well anymore. His heart beats erratically. He may develop total organ failure if this continues. There was a collective gasp in the room. Young Joke balled his fists. "Dude, this isn't right. You guys have to be capable of something." Dr. Mitchell nodded. "We need to wait for his body to respond before we proceed with high-dose treatments and dialysis. If it doesn't, we may need to consider putting him on life support." "No!" Momma Dee screamed, her voice breaking. "My kid is strong. He can live without any machines." Dr. Mitchell's face softened. "I understand that this is difficult, but we are running out of options." The room fell silent as the effect of those words took hold. Then, suddenly, the heart monitors started beeping strangely. The head of Bambi towards the screen. "What's happening? What's wrong?" As Dr. Mitchell rushed to the patient's bedside, nurses streamed into the room. "His heart is racing." The nurses hurriedly adjusted machines and injected drugs as Young Jock screamed, "Take action." Panic is beginning to set in. The tension was unbearable as everyone watched, their hearts pounding in time with the unpredictable beat on the screen. Hours went by quickly, but finally the beeping stopped and Dr. Mitchell exhaled. "Okay, we've got him steady." That being said, this suggests that the situation is urgent. Bambi collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands. With a cry, "This is impossible, I can't let him go." Momma Dee knelt beside her, her hands clenched. He won't be lost. Young Joke paced the room and shook his head, saying, "Baby, we're going to fight. We will fight with all of our might. It doesn't seem real. It shouldn't be this way." Then, as if the universe had heard them, Scrappy twitched his fingers and his eyelids moved slightly. Bambi gasped and said, "Hard." Everyone rushed to be with him. His eyes barely opened and his voice barely raised above a whisper. "Bam." Bambi took hold of his hand and cried, choking, "I'm here, baby. I'm here." Scrappy struggled to look him in the eye. His breathing was shallow and his voice was weak. Then what's happening? Dr. Mitchell gently stepped in. "Scrappy, you've been in the intensive care unit. Your body is fighting hard." "Am I going to die?" Scrappy swallowed, trying to understand. Bambi quickly shook her head and said, "No. No, my love. You'll be fine. You just need to go to sleep." She wiped away her tears, Mother Dee. "Boy, you scared the living daylights out of us." Scrappy gritted his teeth. "I'm still here." Everyone experienced a moment of relief. Dr. Mitchell's face stayed serious. "Scrappy, you need to put in even more effort because the outcome will be determined within the next day." Scrappy blinked slowly. "I got you," Bambi said, kissing his forehead. "That's my man." However, just as hope began to rise, the machines began to blare and Scrappy tensed up. Dr. Mitchell's face turned white as he began to breathe erratically. "He's leaving us, again." The battle was far from over, and the nursing staff rushed as the room erupted in panic. The hospital room was filled with uncertainty, and the sound of the beeping machines broke the eerie silence like a menacing clock ticking away. It was just getting started, and this time it was life or death. Every beep and machine noise reminded everyone that Lil Scrappy's time was running out. Bambi sat next to him, holding Scrappy's limp hand with trembling hands. After spending endless hours by his bedside and sleepless nights, her once perfectly manicured nails had become chipped and broken. Her eyes were swollen from crying. And the once bright rapper who had captivated the world with his energy now seemed to be a fragile shell struggling for survival, his chest barely rising with each shallow breath. At the edge of the room, Momma Dee, the matriarch who had always been Scrappy's strongest ally, paced back and forth, her face etched with worry, her hands so tight on her phone that they whitened her knuckles, her stomach twisting in horror every time the monitors beeped, and she muttered, "Please, Scrappy, you promised me." The world was in a panic outside the hospital, and although she muttered prayers to herself, she knew deep down that faith alone would not save her son at this point. She had always been a rock, but now she could do nothing but watch as her son's life was in danger. Fans flooded social media with prayers and pleas for Scrappy's recovery, with hashtags like #FightScrappy and #PrayForScrappy taking over Instagram and Twitter. His friends, fellow artists, and even people who had previously argued with him sent heartfelt messages asking their followers to remember him. We all watched, prayed, and hoped for a miracle. On the inside, however, things were different. The doctors had just delivered devastating news, and the lead physician, Dr. Mitchell, had just stepped in with the unexpected results of the most recent tests. Scrappy could feel the strain increasing on his already troubled heart as his liver condition worsened. His oxygen levels dropped once more, and his kidneys were barely surviving. "But just yesterday, you said he was improving," Bambi said, her voice trembling as she asked the question that had been on everyone's mind. "How can it have changed so quickly? How did this happen?" Dr. Mitchell took a deep breath, his eyes full of regret. Sometimes the body will give false indications of recovery. It might not be predictable all the time. Even though his organs had improved somewhat, issues have now surfaced. His body is fighting, but it is not enough. Momma Dee responded incredulously and angrily. "You're telling me that you're at your limit? What do you mean, it's not enough? How should we proceed?" Dr. Mitchell paused, his face growing gloomy. "Even though we're doing everything we can, we may need to take more drastic measures because his condition is getting worse. If he doesn't stabilize in the next 24 hours, we may have to consider emergency dialysis or even a transplant. And if his heart continues to fail, we may have to put him on life support." "No," Bambi began sobbing uncontrollably as her voice broke with raw emotion. "You can't do that. He's a combative person. Scrappy won't die like this." Momma Dee stepped forward, her protective instincts taking over. "My son has gone through too much to give up just yet. He's not going anywhere. We will fight. We have to." Dr. Mitchell nodded gravely towards the audience. "We're doing everything we can. but the next 24 hours are crucial. We have to be prepared for anything. As the doctor left the room, Bambi and Momma Dee fell silent, both of them knowing that time was running out and that their only choices were to wait and pray. The situation was weighing down on them like a heavy burden, and neither of them knew what to say. Fans continued to send encouraging messages, but the tone had shifted as news outlets carried stories with headlines like "Doctors fear Scrappy's life is on the line" and "Lil Scrappy's condition worsens. Family desperate." Recovery was no longer the focus of the media circus outside, as reporters frantically sought out any information as paparazzi cameras flashed outside the hospital. Now it was a question of survival. Bambi was at her breaking point. She stood up and said resolutely, "Everyone must be called. As many prayers as possible are needed. We have to fight. This is not the time to leave him." In spite of her own emotional difficulties, Momma Dee nodded in agreement. "We're doing more than just praying. We are fighting. We won't leave him." Bambi pulled out her phone and called her family and close friends. Despite the seeming lack of hope, she had faith that Scrappy's spirit would live on. Taking her hands in hers, Momma Dee knelt next to her. "He won't be lost. We are going to fight. We will see to it that he overcomes this." The conflict had not ended. It was just getting started. This is a battle for Lil Scrappy's life, not just another update. Every prayer matters in the next 24 hours. Please leave a comment below and let the world know if you think that support is powerful. Let's offer Scrappy and his family our support during this extremely trying time. Remember to subscribe to our channel for the most recent information on this startling circumstance. As the story progresses, we will keep you updated on every turn. Keep yourself updated, stay in touch, and remember Scrappy.